here today with Dr. Maike Neuhaus. And thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. I love your work, by the way. I was
Oh, thank
wondering if
you.
you
Thank you
can
for having me.
introduce yourself a little bit.
Yeah, so I'm Dr. Maike Neuhaus. I'm a psychologist by trade, and I have a PhD specializing in human behavior change. And my big passion is really helping people who feel stuck and bored and a bit of sort of la-di-da in their life, bored in their life, and help them understand what humans need in order to flourish so they can create a life that excites them again. If that makes sense. So there's actually a whole lot of science behind what humans need in order to be really happy in life, which is a topic that we tend to go about sort of intuitively, but research shows that we're not very good at understanding what we actually need in order to make us happy. So we often strive for goals that we think will make us happy, but once we achieve them, we feel actually quite, it's a bit of an anticlimactic sort of experience. We don't feel the joy that we were hoping to experience. So I focus my energy on helping people understand what it is they actually need in order to flourish and be deeply happy in life, and sort of help them achieve that. That's sort of what I do now professionally. In terms of things I like to do for fun, I suppose I love hanging with my family. So I have two children, two sons, they're 11 and 14. We love to travel. I like to hang with my friends, just the normal stuff, being outdoors in nature, playing tennis, hiking, all the normal stuff, nothing extraordinary.
Nice. Now, what led you to this subject? Was it a personal journey of yours, or what led you to study happiness?
It's funny because from a very young age, I have very early memories of observing people, some people who were sort of thriving and always knew exactly what they wanted and went for it and accomplished their goals and were happy. And then other people who always seemed to be unhappy, getting in their own way, finding excuses about why they couldn't possibly achieve the things they were hoping to achieve. I've always been observing that from a very young age, and people having regrets, adults telling me about their regrets. And whenever I'd query them, why aren't you doing this now? They'd always have some sort of excuses. Oh, I'm too old. I don't have enough money. I have too many responsibilities. And I always thought to myself, that's not how I want to live. I want to grab life with both hands and, get as many wonderful experiences as I can out of this one life. And it's basically what led me to study psychology once I finished high school. And I specialized back then in organizational and also health psychology, because back then they were the only sort of streams in psychology that actually didn't look at what's wrong with people, which is something we traditionally have always done in psychology, right? Clinical
Right.
psychology. What is it that brings people sort of unhappiness or mental illnesses, and how can we fix this? What's wrong with people? But those two streams were the only ones back then that actually looked at what is right with people and how can we help people, really express their talent or develop further, or create positive changes in their lives. But I worked in those fields for a while, but even that at some stage I found quite unfulfilling. And it wasn't until later that I became aware of that whole body of positive psychology science, which is quite young in
Mhm.
comparison to the other subdisciplines in psychology, that I knew I was onto something and that I had basically found what I liked. And the other part to that is that even though, even specializing in human behavior change, in my PhD and also in my research work, that's all good. Human behavior is hugely complex and it requires an orchestration of many different skills if we really want to introduce lasting change in our lives. But I was always missing, I suppose, a little bit of a guiding framework for, how you can actually identify goals that are really good for you and make you happy in the end, and then go about accomplishing those. So that's something that self-leadership sort of answered for me. So I'm actually combining the science of self-leadership and the science of positive psychology or human flourishing together into one, and kind of do that, through my training, through my online course, in the coaching I do with people. Yeah, that's kind of, because I just think that's the most amazing thing. At the end of the day, everyone wants to be happy, right? Live a good life and those sorts of things. So positive psychology, the science of human flourishing, really provides the answer to what is it that we need in order to live a good life and be deeply happy. And self-leadership offers that guiding framework. Okay, once we've identified what it is we need specifically that we don't have yet in our lives in order to flourish, how can we go about achieving that?
Perfect. I was just going to ask if you could distinguish the two and tell me more, but that was a great way to say it. What does happiness mean to you?
Oh, that's a very good question, because I love that question so much, because happiness can sort of mean something different to every individual person. So the science of human flourishing, though, points out some of the bigger elements that we all need in order to flourish, and they are the same for every person. So for example, we all need social well-being, so we all need to somewhat feel connected to people around us, and also to society, and have hope for where society is going and feel like we can contribute to something larger than ourselves. But what that looks like for every person individually is always different, right? So that's just sort of social well-being, one example of what we need in order to flourish. For me, happiness, how much time do we have? But I'll say this, a self-determined life brings me a lot of happiness. But again, that's probably the same for everyone, because we know autonomy is a common human need. Self-actualization, again, living up to the best version of myself, means happiness to me, but I know it's the same for everybody else as well. And I think being able to live my own purpose, so understanding my own values and how I can express them in my daily life. And that again looks, very specific for me personally. So for example, one of my big values is adventuring. I just love adventuring. So for me that means traveling a lot with my family. I love exploring our planet. I think it's so beautiful. I want to see as much of it as I can. But it can also mean little excursions on the weekends, or just, inviting friends over spontaneously and having a meal together. So, that is, it can look different, very different for me, kind of every day. But
So I noticed that you do have a program. Do you help people discover what makes them specifically happy during that program?
yes, I absolutely incorporate one of the models of human flourishing in my program, the Fresh Start program. Yes, so this program is quite interesting because it's quite extensive. It's quite jam-packed full of I include almost everything I know about what we need to flourish and how to make that happen. So both positive psychology and self-leadership are included in this program, and it's quite intense. Don't just include the signs of human flourishing, what we need in order to be deeply happy, but also how to make that become a reality. And that means always behavior change and creating new habits. And I intentionally created it for sort of over such a long period of time, because I just wanted to be able to accompany people on their journey of establishing a new habit or new habits. And as you probably know, establishing new habits is not a matter of 21 days.
Right.
It usually there is no such specific time frame, but usually it takes a lot longer than just a few days or a couple of weeks. So
Right.
for a while, I offered this program in conjunction with a private Facebook group where I helped people sort of individually, but also private coaching sessions. So that's why it was super helpful to have it sort of spread out across the 3 months, because I actually held people's hands while they were creating that change in their life.
Wow, that's super important, especially for an online program.
Yeah, yeah,
It's
exactly. So at
easy
the
to get
moment,
distracted.
Exactly, exactly. And to come off track and just sort of let it be once you've watched a few videos or whatever. So that's kind of the format I offered this program in until the end of last year. I haven't done it again this year simply because my focus has shifted a little bit and I just needed to free up some of my time. So the program is still available, evergreen on my website. And if you purchase the program, you also get 40% off any of my coaching packages. So I do offer it still so that people can, let's say, easily accompany it with some individual coaching.
Private.
If they want
Great
that extra
idea.
support, yeah.
What do you think are the biggest roadblocks for people to being happy, being able to implement the habits that they want to? I always call it the gap between knowing and doing. What are those
Yes.
roadblocks? Since you're in research, I would love to hear about that.
Yeah, great question, because there are so many. Life is complex, right? And you just mentioned the gap between knowing and doing. There is actually such a thing. Researchers call it the intention behavior gap. So well done.
Mhm.
Absolutely. Only because we have good intentions doesn't mean that that we will actually put things into practice. But there are so many roadblocks we can encounter. So the number one roadblock for realizing meaningful goals that will actually bring us joy is what I mentioned earlier. We all think we know what we need in order to be happy, but research shows that we don't actually. Often we don't. Oops, sorry. Um, it's something, it's so prominent in the population that researchers have a word for it. It's called miswanting. So this is the whole phenomenon of us striving for goals that we think will bring us happiness, but then they don't. So this is one problem. So
Mhm.
we really need to be able to understand what humans need in order to be flourishing, and not just get that sense of fleeting pleasure,
Mhm.
that we sometimes just get from our goals. But the other things are that human behavior change is hugely complex. And I always love it when I see people, sharing small snippets of, well, how can we, create new habits, for example. And all these snippets are great. So, for example, break big steps into smaller steps, or do habit stacking, where we use existing habits to attach a new habit onto, because we already have created those neural pathways in our brains. So it's much easier to connect that with existing habits, or, so many other examples. But the thing is, I think what really stands in our way is that we need to know as many of these strategies as we can, because we are hugely complex human beings, and in different situations we will be required to rely on different strategies.
Mhm.
And a very, very large one of these is, for example, understanding how we can regulate our own thoughts, emotions, and then obviously actions as well. But even just thinking about all our cognitive biases, so the errors we have in our thinking, and, when people start to self-sabotage or procrastinate their problems and finding excuses, and sometimes it's really easy to call out those excuses, us for ourselves. We know we just found an excuse, but our minds are very, very clever. And psychologically, we have a huge sort of innate human need of acting in line with who we believe we are. And if we don't do that, if our actions are not aligned with what we said we do and who we think we are, we feel something called cognitive dissonance, something that feels very uncomfortable for us. And our human psyche is very quick at getting rid of that. And there are several ways we get rid of that. We can just ignore it. So this is a problem, right? Because here we are procrastinating and we don't even realize it. Or, of course, we change our behavior in line with what our intentions were. But that's the hard one, right? Changing our behavior.
Right.
Or we change the way we think about ourselves. Usually we think, oh, what I say, I'm going to do, I'm hugely reliable, I can, I'm hugely conscientious, and so forth. So, of course, we can start thinking that, okay, I've always been sort of unreliable in that way. Or we change the way we think about our behavior, that I didn't really take a day off today. I needed to do some self-care, or I really needed to, so we can
Right.
also change the way
Make
we think about
excuses.
our actions. Yeah, so there are excuses again, and they can seem very, very plausible to us. So that's just one tiny example of the way we can self-sabotage without really noticing it. And knowing about when that happens and understanding how we can catch ourselves and switch out of that in a very gentle and self-compassionate way, again, is one of the many things that I also teach in my program. So I think what really gets in our way is so many different things. And I know I'm blapping on a little bit, but I just also wanted to say one other thing, because you
Yes,
asked,
please.
what gets in our way?
Yes.
Because this is something I observe so often in my clients, and it's that we all lead such busy lives these
Mm,
days,
yes.
and we cannot underestimate the role that plays in us getting in our own way. So I have these, people who want some coaching, and they, if I ask them, okay, they'll tell me, I just can't seem to get myself to exercise, regularly. And then once I've asked them, to tell me about your day, what does your typical day look like, or a typical week? It turns out that they're full-time working mums who have like 3 children under the age of 5 at home, running the whole household. They also do volunteer work in the community. They do all these amazing things, but then they beat themselves up that at 8 p.m. they can't seem to motivate themselves to also now go to the gym. It doesn't work like that,
Yeah.
there's only so much we can accomplish in any one day or any one week. And I think this is where the importance sort of comes through of really understanding what really matters to you, so understanding our values and then prioritizing. We do have to sometimes let go of things, or do those most important things sort of early on in the day, so that the rest of the day can't sort of get in our way either. So I think it's just a combination of many, many different things that lead to us getting into our own ways.
Right. It's one thing saying, "Hey, I'm too busy. I don't have time for exercise," which is super important to me. Like I that's part of therapy for me. But
Yes.
it's beating yourself up after you have to do all those things and not having time. It puts even more pressure on something that's makes it worse.
Absolutely. And it's so common.
How would you say your methods are different than others? There's so many programs out there. I personally do a lot of work with breath work and awareness, but how are you're so research based. That's what fascinated me about you. I'm
Mm.
wondering, how are your methods different? Like, why
I
should someone
think
choose your program?
I think you already gave one of the answers away. All my work is evidence-based or research-based, and I'm just a huge believer of that. For me, working evidence-based just means that things have been trialed and tested in the past and shown to work. I personally would never go with anything else, because I'm a huge fan of efficiency. Why would I try something that studies have investigated and shown they actually don't work? And there are lots of those things out there, and it always baffles me that people still go for those. So I absolutely work evidence-based. So all this stuff I teach and sort of train or coach has been tested and shown to work. The
Give us
other ways.
examples, like what kind of things have been tested, treatments that you use in your program?
Absolutely. So if we talk about positive psychology, or the human flourishing framework, so those consist of things that we actually know we need. So I'm not teaching you or helping you to incorporate changes in your lives that actually won't make a positive difference. And
Right.
there are many people who actually do that, lots of them unknowingly, just because they don't have the means, or they haven't had the education to look at, to be able to distinguish what is actually evidence-based and what is not, or simply because they don't believe in it. But to me, that's like not believing in the fact that the earth is round, for example. I think, anyway. So, but to give you another example, so any of the tools I use to help my clients. So I'm a certified positive psychology practitioner as well, and that meant I've done some extra education to learn many practical tools to help people understand how to flourish in their lives and how to make that happen. So the tools I use have also been tested in studies and have shown to make a positive difference, and to actually work. So that's sort of one way in which I'm different to many others.
Mm-hmm.
And apart from having the qualifications in the field, it's also that I specialize in those two streams. So I am very familiar with all the science behind human flourishing, so that the sort of the science of happiness. So that's something I am very familiar with, but also I'm an expert in human behavior change. So I can help you with both the what and the how. What do you need to actually become happy, and how do you make that happen? And to be honest, I think that is very rare. I don't know that there are many people who actually specialized in both of those things.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously the human behavior change is that whole focus on self-leadership, so that whole inclusive overarching framework.
So I'm very much into mind body, like somatic kind of healing, like Dr. Levine. I've read the book and done workshops with Dr. Bessel van der Kolk. What is your take on that? Somatic healing, not just from understanding, but releasing energy and trauma from the body.
That's a very good question, and not one that I'm really qualified to answer. I can say that from sort of obviously my studies, I know that there is a connection, and it's fascinated people for years and centuries. It seems to be bi-directional, so both the body influences the mind influences the body.
Mm-hmm.
But I think there are still very many unknowns. But to be quite honest, I can't really speak to that, because I haven't done any research or qualifications or anything like that. So I think you're probably much better placed to answer those questions than I am.
Okay, thank you so much. Is there anything else you would like to add?
I would say for people, if they kind of want a starting point of sort of where to go, I always get accused by my friend of giving too much away for free, especially on my Instagram. So if they don't know where to start, or on my Facebook as well, they can have a look there. I post about this all the time in terms of what we actually need in order to flourish.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say if they want to make a start, really diving into getting to know themselves, because ultimately it's about connecting those two dots. What do you know about what you need in order to be happy? And who are you? Because if you want to create any sort of meaningful and positive change in your life, you need to understand who you are and where you're at, understanding your strengths, your values, your personality, your belief systems, and all that sort of stuff. So really starting to getting to know yourself, and then sort of putting those two dots together.
I love that. That's so true. So how can people find you?
So I'm on Instagram. I just changed my handle. I'm now the Flourishing Doc on Instagram, and I'm actually going through an absolute brand refresh. So on Facebook, I'm still Dr. Maike Neuhaus, so you can find my page there. I also have a website, drmaikeneuhaus.com, and you'll probably have to spell that out for your listeners or viewers somewhere, because my name is a nightmare.
Yeah.
Thank you. But I'm also you can actually also just Google the Flourishing Doc, or put in theflourishingdoc.com, because my website will be transferred to that, and it already sort of works backwards. So if you just put in theflourishingdoc.com, it'll go to my current website. Yeah, I think they're probably sort of the biggest platforms. I'm also on LinkedIn, of course. If anyone is there, feel free to connect with me there as well.
Thank you so much.
Oh, my absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for having me, Linda.